20 days of total silence. That's what my wife decided I should get after I had the nerve to suggest she help with chores instead of treating me like her personal butler. But here's the thing about the silent treatment. Sometimes the other person discovers they actually prefer the quiet. I'd come off a 12-hour shift and walked into a kitchen that looked like a tornado had blown through, dishes heaped everywhere, takeout containers littering the counters, and her planted on the couch scrolling her phone like she was researching a cure for cancer. I made what apparently was an unforgivable move and said, "Hey, think you could give me a hand cleaning up before dinner?" The look she shot me could have frozen hell over. "Excuse me, I work too, you know. I'm not your maid." "I never said you were. I just thought we could tackle this together since we both live here." That's when she grabbed her purse, stood up, and dropped the line that would set the tone for the next 3 weeks. "Figure it out yourself, and don't expect me to talk to you until you learn some respect." The front door slammed so hard it rattled the windows. When she returned 2 hours later, I figured we'd at least have a normal conversation about what happened. I was wrong. She walked past me as if I were invisible, went straight to the bedroom, and that was that. No good night, no eye contact, nothing. I told myself she probably needed time to cool off. Day 2 came, and still nothing. I tried the reasonable route first. "Look, if I came across wrong yesterday, we should talk about it." She poured coffee, walked right past me, and left for work like I didn't exist. On day 3 I tried humor. "So this is what marriage counselors mean by communication issues, huh?" Not even a smirk. By day 5 it hit me what this really was. It wasn't about the dishes or respect or anything surface level, it was about control. She'd chosen to freeze me out to make me crawl, apologize for things I didn't need to apologize for, and train me to never question her again. The pattern became obvious. She'd stomp around the house doing over-the-top cleaning when I was in the room, slamming cabinet doors and huffing like she was performing a one-woman show about domestic martyrdom. She'd prepare elaborate meals with me sitting right there and not offer so much as a napkin. And the social posts, those were the giveaway. Her Instagram filled up with quotes about knowing your worth and cutting toxic people out. On day 7 something shifted for me. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating a sandwich I'd made, watching her silent tantrum routine, and I started to laugh. Actually laugh. There she was, a grown woman who thought withholding conversation would break me down. Instead, it revealed exactly who I'd married. She stopped mid-huff and stared, probably waiting for me to explain what was so funny. But two could play at this, right? Wrong, I wasn't playing. I just kept eating my sandwich and scrolling my phone. By day 10 the house felt remarkably peaceful, no fights over whose turn it was to take out the trash, no passive-aggressive comments about how I loaded the dishwasher, no dramatic shouting when I wanted to watch sports instead of her reality shows. I started seeing an upside to the arrangement. She, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated. I could see it in how she hovered in doorways when I was in a room, itching to speak but committed to her protest. She dropped things loudly when I was near, obviously hoping I'd ask if she was okay. When I didn't take the bait, she'd pick them up with extra force and storm off. Day 12 showed the first crack in her resolve. I was cooking dinner for one when she walked into the kitchen and stood there for a full 5 minutes, waiting for me to offer her some food or ask why she hadn't made her own. I finished, plated my meal, ate it while she watched, cleaned my dishes, put them away, and left her standing there. Day 15 brought reinforcements. Her sister called out of the blue asking if everything was all right because my wife sounded really stressed. I told her everything was fine on my end. I was just giving my wife the space she'd asked for. When her sister tried to pry, I said simply she could end this anytime by having an adult conversation. The next morning my wife changed tactics. Instead of ignoring me, she started doing things that would normally require a response, standing in front of the TV while I was watching, rearranging furniture I was using, even knocking over my coffee cup. Each time she waited, expecting me to react. Each time I just cleaned up, moved, or found another spot without acknowledging her. Day 18 felt like desperation. She blasted music loud enough for the neighbors to notice, left cabinet doors open I had to close to use the kitchen, and even hid the TV remote. That last one nearly made me laugh. a grown woman hiding a remote like a toddler. What she didn't realize during her 3-week silent tantrum was that I was using the downtime to think, really think, about what my life had become and what I wanted from it. Every quiet morning, every peaceful evening, every night free of manufactured drama showed me things I hadn't seen clearly before. Day 20 she paced the house like a caged animal, looking at me with an expression that screamed, "Aren't you going to do something?" But I was doing something, planning what came next, because day 21 was looming and I had a hunch she'd try to break the silence and pretend this childish episode never happened, expecting me to be grateful for her attention and forget why we were here. She had no idea what she was about to find out. Day 21 began exactly as I figured. She walked into the kitchen that morning with a carefully rehearsed casualness, pouring coffee like the last 3 weeks hadn't occurred. "I was thinking we could go to that new restaurant downtown tonight," she said, expecting me to be there to hear it. I wasn't. I'd left at 5:30 that morning, 2 hours before she usually got up. My overnight bag was already in the car, along with everything else. I had quietly moved out over the past week while she was too busy staging her silent treatment to notice what was actually happening around her. The beauty of someone giving the silent treatment is they stop paying attention to anything you do. They're so focused on making sure you notice they're ignoring you that they become oblivious to your actual movements. While she slammed doors and huffed around the house, I was methodically removing important documents from our shared filing cabinet. While she posted cryptic social quotes, I was transferring half our savings into an individual account I'd opened. While she hid remotes like a petulant child, I was researching temporary housing options. She probably stood in that kitchen for a good 10 minutes waiting for me to respond to her generous offer of dinner. When the silence stretched too long, she likely called my name or walked the house looking for me, checked the garage for my car. That's when she would have found the note I'd left on the bathroom mirror, short and to the point. Silence is golden. Enjoy it forever. My phone started ringing around 8:30. I was already at my temporary place, a furnished rental across town, having my first peaceful cup of coffee in 3 weeks. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. By noon I had 17 missed calls. The voicemails began apologetic, "Okay, very funny. You made your point. Come home and we'll talk." Then they turned frustrated, "This is ridiculous. You can't just leave over something this stupid." By evening they were angry, "You're being completely unreasonable. I was trying to fix things this morning and you disappeared like a coward." I saved every single one, not because I enjoyed hearing her panic, but because they proved something important. After 20 days of treating me like I didn't exist, she expected me to be grateful for 5 words about dinner plans. After 3 weeks of psychological manipulation disguised as moral superiority, she thought I should jump at the chance to pretend it never happened. The next morning she switched strategies. She showed up at my office. Somehow she'd figured out where I was working that day. My coworker mentioned a woman in the lobby asking for me, and I could see her through the window pacing back and forth with that determined look she gets when she decides to force a conversation. I stayed at my desk and sent a text. "The same energy you have for 20 days of silence is the same energy I have for permanent distance." She left, but not quietly. Building security said she stood in the parking lot yelling at my car for about 15 minutes before driving off. That afternoon the cavalry arrived. Her mother called in that diplomatic voice she uses when trying to be helpful. "Now, I don't know what happened between you two, but don't you think you're both being a little dramatic? Marriage takes work and sometimes we have to swallow our pride." "You're absolutely right," I told her. "Someone should have mentioned that to your daughter 3 weeks ago when she decided to shut down all communication because I asked her to help with dishes." Silence on the line for a moment. "She said you were disrespectful and demanding." I said, and I quote, "Hey, think you could give me a hand cleaning up before dinner?" If that's disrespectful and demanding in your family, I can see where she learned her conflict resolution skills. Her mother tried a few more diplomatic angles, but I could tell the conversation was shifting. She was beginning to see her daughter might have painted a very different picture. Day 3 of my new arrangement brought her sister to my rental. She knocked for about 10 minutes before I opened the door. "This is insane," she started. "She's miserable. You're being cruel." "Cruel?" I said. I'm giving her exactly what she wanted. She specifically told me not to expect her to talk to me. I'm just honoring her request long term. You know that's not what she meant. Actually, that's exactly what she meant for 20 days. The only difference is I decided I liked the arrangement better than she did. Her sister went for the family loyalty angle about working things out and my stubbornness, but something interesting happened. She let slip that my wife had been calling her every day for a week, increasingly frantic about fixing this without actually apologizing or admitting what she'd done. She's scared, her sister finally admitted. She didn't think you'd actually leave. Then she realized she didn't know me as well as she thought she did. By the end of the week I'd heard from her father, 2 friends, and even our neighbor, all trying different approaches to convince me to come home and work things out. Each conversation revealed more about how she was spinning the situation and how desperate she'd become. But here's what none of them understood: I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt or seeking revenge or trying to teach her a lesson. I was just done. 20 days of silent treatment gave me something I hadn't expected: clarity, a complete, crystal clear understanding of who I'd been married to and what my life could be without the constant drama and manipulation. The rental I found was small but comfortable. I could eat when I wanted, watch what I wanted, and go to bed without wondering what mood she'd be in the next morning or what tiny misstep would trigger the next emotional punishment. My phone buzzed with another text from her: "Please just come home. We need to talk about this like adults." I looked at that message a long time. 21 days ago I would have jumped at those words. The old me would have seen that as progress, proof she was finally ready to have the conversation I'd been trying to have for 3 weeks. But the new me noticed something different. Even in her plea to talk like adults, there was no acknowledgement of what she'd done, no apology for 3 weeks of childish behavior, no recognition that her actions had consequences, just the expectation that I should come running because she'd finally decided to grace me with words again. I deleted the message without replying because I'd learned something valuable during those 20 days of silence. Sometimes the best response to manipulation is to show someone exactly what life looks like without you in it. And sometimes that life looks pretty good. 2 weeks into my new place, she escalated into what I can only call full-scale psychological warfare. The phone calls had slowed, but the manipulation ramped up. First came social media, her Instagram flooded with posts about forgiveness, second chances, and how real love means fighting for each other, each one designed to paint her as the devoted wife abandoned inexplicably by a husband who'd walked out over nothing. The comments were exactly what she wanted: "You deserve so much better, hun. Some men just can't handle a strong woman. He doesn't know what he lost." What her followers didn't know was she'd blocked me from seeing those posts directly. She wanted me to hear about them secondhand so mutual friends would tell me how heartbroken and dignified she was being online. The first friend to mention it was Dave from work. "Hey man, I saw your wife's posts. Rough situation, you guys working it out?" "Depends," I said. "Did her posts mention the 3 weeks she refused to speak to me because I asked her to help with dishes?" Dave's face changed. "Oh no, she just said you guys were having communication issues and you moved out suddenly." Communication issues, that's one way to put it. But the social campaign was only the opening move. Then came the strategic appearances. She started turning up where she knew I'd be: the gym after work, the weekend grocery store, always looking devastated, always making sure other people saw her that way. The most obvious was at the coffee shop near my new place. She walked in while I was reading on a Saturday morning, ordered something she didn't even like, and sat 3 tables away, close enough so people could see us in the same space, far enough that it didn't look confrontational. She kept glancing over with those meaningful looks, probably hoping I'd come over. When I didn't take the bait, she sighed loudly and touched her wedding ring while staring out the window with a pained expression. The performance was so obvious the barista eventually asked if I knew her. I said she was working through some things. After an hour of theatrical suffering, she gave up and left, deliberately walking slowly past my table to give me one last chance. I kept reading. The next week she tried a more direct manipulation. She convinced her mother to call me with a medical emergency story: chest pains, a trip to the ER, and asking for me specifically. I drove to the hospital immediately, genuinely worried despite everything. When I got there, she was in the waiting room scrolling her phone and looked perfectly fine. "Where's your mother?" I asked. She looked up, hopeful. "She's fine. I just needed you to come so we could talk somewhere neutral." I stared at her. "You faked a medical emergency to manipulate me into meeting you?" "I didn't fake anything," she said. "She had chest pains. Probably stress from what you're putting this family through." The audacity was breathtaking. Even when caught in an obvious lie, she found a way to make it my fault. "You used your mother's health to manipulate me. Do you understand how twisted that is? I used the truth to get you here because you're being unreasonable. We're married, we should be able to talk. We could have talked any time in the past 5 weeks. You chose 3 weeks of silence instead." "No, it wasn't. You were trying to control me then, and you're trying to control me now. The only difference is your methods." I left her in that hospital waiting room and drove home. But the conversation changed something. She'd shown me there was literally no line she wouldn't cross to get what she wanted: medical emergencies, public manipulation, family pressure, everything was fair game in her mind. That weekend she tried another tactic. I came home to find her car parked at my rental complex, and she was sitting on the front steps like she belonged there. "We need to discuss practical things," she said when I walked up. "Bills, taxes, our lease. You can't just pretend our life together doesn't exist." She was right about one thing: practical matters needed addressing, but I'd already handled them. I called the landlord and explained I'd moved out permanently. I switched the utilities in my name. I contacted the insurance companies. Everything was taken care of. "What do you mean everything's been taken care of?" she demanded, color draining. "I mean I've handled the practical stuff. You don't need to worry. You can't just make unilateral decisions about our life." "Sure I can. You demonstrated that beautifully for 3 weeks when you made a unilateral decision to shut down our marriage because I asked you to help clean the kitchen. That's not what happened, and you know it." "That's exactly what happened. And now you're discovering actions have consequences beyond what you intended." She stood, shifting into that aggressive mode she uses when cornered. "You're throwing away 7 years of marriage over hurt feelings." "I'm not throwing anything away. You did that when you decided psychological manipulation was an appropriate response to a reasonable request. I'm just acknowledging reality." "So what? We're just done? Just like that?" "We were done 3 weeks ago. You just didn't realize it yet." She tried tears, anger, promises to change, and threats about what divorce would cost me, but something in how I heard all of it had changed. Instead of emotional manipulation, I heard a person desperately trying to avoid the consequences of her choices. When she finally left, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized something profound had happened over the past few weeks. Weeks later, I realized I wasn't the same guy who'd casually asked her to help with the dishes 2 months earlier. That version of me had been trained to weather her moods, manage her feelings, and shoulder responsibility for her happiness, whereas this new version had learned he could live calmly without non-stop drama and that he didn't have to bargain with someone who wielded silence like a weapon. My phone buzzed with a text: "I'm not giving up on us." I read it, set the phone down, and went to make dinner. For one, 3 weeks after I made my move permanent, she switched into what I can only call scorched earth mode. The tears and public performances hadn't worked. The family interventions failed. The fake emergencies backfired. So she decided that if she couldn't get me back, she'd make sure everyone thought it was my fault. The first sign was my boss calling me into his office on a Monday and asking me to be straight about whether I had any personal issues that might affect my work. I knew right away what had happened. When I asked, he admitted he'd gotten a call over the weekend from someone worried about my mental state, saying I'd abandoned my family and might be having a breakdown. That someone was my wife. "No, I'm not having a breakdown," I told him. I walked away from an unhealthy partnership, and apparently she decided to spread that problem around. He nodded slowly and said my work hadn't suffered. If anything, I seemed more focused, and suggested I consider changing my personal phone number if it continued. That afternoon I found out she'd also called my gym alleging I'd used her credit card without permission to pay my membership. The manager apologized and said they'd frozen my account pending resolution. I produced bank statements showing I'd paid for the membership myself for 2 years. This is harassment, he said, shaking his head. We see this sometimes during divorces. I'll restore your account, but document everything. Document it, sound advice. By Wednesday, 3 of my friends had gotten calls from her, each conversation following the same script about my mental health, how I'd become verbally aggressive before leaving, and her fear I might be having a psychological episode. The friend who knew me best shut it down immediately, suggested she focus on her own situation instead of trying to ruin my reputation, but the damage spread. She called my brother, my parents, even tracked down my college roommate on Facebook, tailoring the stories slightly for each person while keeping the theme the same. I'd snapped without warning and abandoned our marriage because I was unstable. What she didn't expect was that some of those people would call me to check on my well-being. My mother was first, worried because she'd received a disturbing call from my wife saying I'd been acting erratically. I explained the truth: 3 weeks of silent treatment, a pattern of manipulation, the fake emergency. My mother listened and then said, "So she gave you the silent treatment for asking her to help with housework, and now she's telling people you're mentally unstable? That explains a lot I didn't understand about your marriage." By the end of the week, her smear campaign had spectacularly backfired. People who knew me saw through the story immediately, and those who didn't know me enough to judge grew suspicious when a woman started calling them with detailed psychological assessments of her own husband. But she wasn't finished. On a Friday evening, I came home to police officers outside my building who asked if I was the resident of Unit 12. They said someone had requested a wellness check reporting I might be a danger to myself or others. I kept calm and let them in, showed them around my neat apartment, and answered questions about my mental state and recent behavior. They were professional but visibly skeptical. "Sir, have you had thoughts of harming yourself or anyone else?" the officer asked. "Officer, the only harm I'm considering right now is hiring a lawyer to stop this harassment campaign," I said. The older officer nodded. "That might not be a bad idea. We see this pattern sometimes. Someone doesn't get the response they want from a breakup, so they use official channels to force contact or create problems." After they left, I sat staring at my phone, stunned that someone who'd lived with me for 7 years had called law enforcement and suggested I posed a threat to public safety. That's when it hit me: I wasn't dealing with mere hurt or anger. I was dealing with someone willing to wreck my reputation, career, and possibly my freedom because I refused to give in to emotional manipulation. I called the lawyer I consulted about the separation and booked an emergency appointment. Saturday morning brought another twist. My landlord called to say someone had filed a complaint alleging I was violating the lease by engaging in domestic violence, that I'd threatened my wife and she feared for her safety if I stayed in the area. He said he had to investigate any domestic violence claims and asked me to come in Monday with documentation about our separation. "Absolutely," I said, "and I'll bring my lawyer." That evening I decided I had to stop reacting and start acting. I spent the weekend compiling everything: every call, text, public appearance, and false report to authorities. I saved social posts, voicemails, and built a timeline of her behavior since I left. By Sunday night I had a comprehensive file that told a clear story: a partner who began with silent treatment as emotional manipulation and escalated to harassment, false reports, and attempts to destroy her husband's reputation when he refused to return to an unhealthy relationship. Monday morning I walked into my lawyer's office with 40 pages of documentation and a direct request. "I want a divorce, and I want a restraining order. This person has shown she's willing to involve my employer, the police, and anyone she can manipulate to try to force me back, and I need legal protection from someone with no boundaries." My lawyer reviewed the evidence and said this was a strong harassment case. The pattern was clear and escalating, and false reports to police are taken seriously by judges. "We can file the restraining order petition today," he said. "The divorce will take longer, but given this behavior, the court should understand why reconciliation isn't an option." That afternoon she was served with papers at our old house. The restraining order barred her from contacting me directly, coming to my workplace, or making false reports to authorities. The process server said she was genuinely shocked when she realized I'd gone legal. Apparently she'd expected me to keep absorbing her escalating behavior indefinitely. The most revealing part was her immediate reaction. Within an hour of being searched, she called her sister, mother, and 3 friends to complain that I was using lawyers to intimidate her and airing private matters publicly. The woman who'd spent 3 weeks involving my boss and the police in our private life suddenly cared about privacy the second she faced consequences. My phone, which she was legally prohibited from calling, stayed blissfully silent for the first time in a month. That night I made myself a decent dinner, watched whatever I wanted, and slept knowing tomorrow would bring more of the same peaceful routine. 21 days of silence had taught me to value peace, and the weeks of harassment that followed taught me to protect it. The restraining order changed everything almost overnight. My phone stopped buzzing with desperate texts and manipulative voicemails, my workplace returned to normal, and the anxiety about what false reports she might file next melted away. But the quiet didn't last forever. 2 weeks after the court order, she found a loophole. Unable to contact me directly, she started using intermediaries, her sister calling about practical matters, her mother needing clarification on family financial details, even the mailman casually mentioning she'd asked him about my forwarding address. The boldest move came through our shared dentist's office when the receptionist called to confirm an appointment supposedly made for both of us. When I explained we were separated and had a no-contact order, she got flustered and admitted my wife had suggested the timing, even knew my work schedule. Classic manipulation. She'd studied my routines for 7 years and was creating scenarios where I'd have to respond indirectly. But I learned something vital about boundaries during the separation: they only work if you enforce them. Every attempt at indirect contact got the same reply: please refer her to my attorney. The dentist's office, the insurance company, our former landlord, anyone she tried to use as a go-between received the same professional redirection, and within days people stopped taking her calls about my affairs. The real breakthrough came when her sister finally called me, not to pass along a message but to ask what actually happened between us. She'd noticed my wife telling 3 different stories, first a fight about housework, then a fight about respect, then claims I'd become verbally abusive and unstable. I told her the simple truth: 3 weeks of silent treatment over a request to help with dishes, followed by escalating manipulation when I refused to pretend none of it happened. Wait, she gave you the silent treatment for 3 weeks? She asked. 20 days to be exact, I replied. There was a long pause, then she admitted her sister did that to her once as a kid, wouldn't speak to her for a month over a borrowed sweater, and she thought she'd outgrown it. I usually cave and apologize just to get her speaking again, she said, and then actually laughed. That conversation revealed something crucial. I wasn't the first person she'd ever used silent treatment on. It was her go-to control tactic that had worked because people around her gave in, and I appeared to be the first who walked away. The final puzzle piece came when my lawyer called with an update. She was requesting mediation and wanted to work things out amicably without involving the courts. What do you think? He asked. I think she's realizing her behavior over the past 2 months has created a very strong case against her in divorce court, he said. She probably wanted mediation to keep all of this out of the official record. Will you be there? He asked. Absolutely, I replied, and added that keeping it simple would be wise. We documented everything thoroughly, and sometimes the best strategy is to let someone's actions speak for themselves. The mediation was set for the following week, and for the first time since day 21 I would be in the same room with her. But I wasn't the same man who'd asked her to help with dishes 5 months earlier. That man had been conditioned to manage her moods and absorb manipulation, while this man had learned that some behaviors aren't worth tolerating and some relationships aren't worth the effort. The night before mediation I made a decent dinner, watched the sunset from my balcony, and went to bed early. No anxiety, no rehearsing, no wondering what mood she'd be in, just the steady routine of someone who'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being at peace. The mediation room was sterile and corporate, built to strip emotion from hard conversations. She arrived 15 minutes early and was already seated when my lawyer and I walked in, and for the first time in months I saw her without theatrical performances or strategic positioning, just a tired, smaller version of the woman I remembered. The mediator explained the process and asked if either of us wanted to make an opening statement. She launched into a prepared speech about forgiveness, how everyone makes mistakes, and how walking away without trying to repair things was abandoning our commitment. When she finished, the mediator turned to me and asked if I wanted to respond. Not really, I said. I think the documentation speaks for itself. My lawyer slid a folder across the table, 23 pages of texts, voicemails, police reports, employer contacts, and social screenshots, a complete timeline from day 21 through the restraining order. She flipped through a few pages and went pale. "You documented everything," she said. "Everything." The mediator read the file in silence for several minutes, and when he looked up his neutral expression had shifted to concern. "This represents a significant pattern of harassment and manipulation. Can you explain your reasoning behind these actions?" She tried a few defenses. The behavior was taken out of context. She was exaggerating normal emotional responses. She'd been desperate to save the marriage and maybe went too far. The mediator pressed. "So you acknowledge filing false police reports and contacting his employer were inappropriate?" "I never filed false reports. I was genuinely concerned about his mental state," she insisted. "Based on what evidence?" he asked. "He left suddenly without trying to work things out. According to this timeline, you refused to speak to him for 20 days. How was he supposed to work things out?" That was when her composure cracked and she admitted what everyone in the room already suspected. He was supposed to apologize, to realize dismissing her feelings and treating her like hired help was wrong, to fight for the marriage instead of giving up. The room went quiet. Even she seemed to realize she just described her own tactic, silent treatment, as punishment until he apologized for asking her to help with chores. The mediator clarified what that meant, and she couldn't answer honestly without confirming the pattern. She'd used emotional manipulation as control and, when it didn't work, escalated to harassment and false accusations. The mediator then asked me what outcome I wanted from the divorce: simple division of assets, no alimony, and continuation of the restraining order until the divorce was final. "That's extremely unfair," she objected, claiming she'd given up career opportunities to support my ambitions and deserved spousal support. My lawyer opened another folder with financial records showing both of us worked full-time during the marriage and contributed equally. There was no evidence of career sacrifice or dependency. The mediation ran 3 hours, but the decision was effectively made early. When someone's entire case depends on victimhood, it collapses once their documented behavior proves otherwise. By the end, she agreed to the terms I requested: no alimony, equal asset division, and an extended no-contact agreement, and her lawyer, who'd barely spoken, looked relieved to be done. As we gathered our papers, she made one last attempt. "This isn't how I wanted things to end." I looked at her, for the first time that day, and said, "You ended things on day 1 of your silent treatment. Everything since then has just been paperwork." 6 months later, her sister texted me to say she was engaged to someone she'd met 3 months earlier and thought I should know in case my ex tried to contact me about timing. I deleted the message without replying. The woman who'd given me 20 days of silence to teach me a lesson had moved on faster than our separation took to finalize. The real lesson she taught me was far more valuable than she intended. She showed me I could live peacefully without constant drama, that I didn't have to negotiate with manipulation, and that sometimes the best response to someone's worst behavior is to let them face the natural results of their choices. The apartment I found during those chaotic early weeks became a house I bought the following year. The quiet routine I discovered during her silent treatment turned into a life I genuinely enjoyed, and the boundaries I learned to enforce became standards I refused to compromise again. She tried to punish me with silence until I learned my place, but instead she taught me that silence can truly be golden and that the right person's absence is more valuable than the wrong person's presence. The last voicemail she left demanding I come home and talk like adults is still saved on my phone, and sometimes I listen to it to remember how different my life sounded when someone else controlled the volume. These days the only voices in my house are the ones I choose to hear. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.